If you listen to music, you've probably heard about MP3 files. You know, the type of music file that has super small file sizes so you can store tons of them. But have you ever wondered how MP3s can shrink songs by so much? It turns out the answer has to do with these things called sine waves, which were originally invented because of circles, but actually describe everything from electricity to springs to light itself. So how exactly do sine waves help you save your music? Sine waves are actually really easy to understand. Imagine a dot of paint on a spinning wheel. If you look at the height of that dot over time, it goes up and down and up and down, so if you graph it over time you get something repeating, and that's a sine wave. The exact graph might vary depending on your wheel, of course. If it spins super fast, the dot will move up and down at a higher frequency and make a wave that looks more squished. But that's all there is to it, looking at spinning things over time. By the way, most students probably learn the word sine when learning about right triangles, where it represents some ratio. There's an easy way to see it's the same thing as what I've just said. You can draw that right triangle using the center of the circle and our spinning dot, and the sine ratio just works out to be equal to the dot's height. This spinning height thing might seem like a weird thing to think about, but it's actually how sound works. When you hear something, the molecules in the air are actually moving back and forth in a repeating pattern, and that works exactly like a sine wave. By the way, you know how old 8-bit video games had super tinny sounding music? That's because these old video game consoles were trying to simulate sine waves, but because they could only store 2 to the 8, or 256, values, their imperfect waves sounded tinny. Of course, as computers got better, they could store more and more values until they could basically replicate sine waves perfectly. Anyway, it turns out it's possible to make any wave you want by combining together an infinite number of sine waves. And that's great for us because sine waves are really easy to combine. If you have 2 waves you want to combine, just look at the distance to the middle of each wave. Mathematicians love using arrows for this because they keep track of negatives really well. Then put one arrow at the end of the other and it'll trace out the wave that you get by combining the 2 of them. And that's how you add sine waves. Anyway, it turns out there's a really nice way of taking a sound and splitting it into a ton of sine waves that can then be added back together to get your original wave. It's called the Fourier Transform, named after Joseph Fourier, a late 18th century French mathematician. Using the Fourier Transform, you can figure out how to build any wave you want out of sine waves, although you might need an infinite number of them. So back to MP3 files. It turns out that your brain can't hear anything above a certain frequency. For adults it's about 20,000 Hz and for kids it's about 15,000 Hz. So here's the trick. Instead of saving the sound wave itself, which takes up tons of space, MP3 files save the sine waves instead. And then they can just throw away all the sine waves that humans can't hear. And presto, throwing stuff away equals smaller files. By harnessing the power of spinning wheels, we can store millions of songs on a tiny phone. I love math.